Okay, so I chose as a title for my talk, Making Sense of Urban Labs. And okay, well, you could also call it Making Sense of Urban Labs, because I try to connect the notion of urban labs also to your project, your context of the SuNSE project. A little introduction about myself. I'm working at 2 universities actually, and in fact 3 places of work. I work as Associate Professor of Environmental Sciences at the Dutch Open University, distance teaching university. Where you would have been now, I guess, when the meeting would have been in Heerlen, because on the campus of the Open University also Nijmegen is located, where Linda is working. I combined this position with a full professorship at Maastricht University, which is 20 kilometers away from Heerlen to the west. I'm professor of sustainability assessment there. And what I also do is I have a direct involvement with Stadslab Heerlen or City Lab Heerlen, which is coordinated by Monique and Linda, and also sort of partner that is implementing the SuNSE project for Heerlen municipality. I'm member of the core team. Originally, as you can see from my position at Open University, I'm an environmental scientist. I gradually became broader interested in sustainability issues. Since about 6 years, more specifically in sustainable urban development. And from my interest in sustainable urban development, I became interested in a new phenomenon, the phenomenon of urban labs, which I've been studying since about 2014. And from that work on urban labs, I also became involved in the design and development, and actually also the running of the City Lab Heerlen, Stadslab Heerlen. So I'm together with Monique and Linda and a few other people, part of the core team of the City Lab Heerlen. As I indicated, I'm involved in research on urban labs since about 2014, starting with the UrbanX project, which was a European project, together with Malmö, Antwerp, Graz in Austria, and Maastricht in the Netherlands. So all places where urban labs had started, and together with these labs, we were studying how they worked and how they could be supported in further development. And this is a line that I've continued throughout all the other projects where you see the logos listed on this slide. These are other European projects, also international projects, where we collaborate with, for example, Sao Paulo, Cape Town, Phoenix in Arizona, but also national projects where we collaborate with the Dutch network of city labs. And in these projects, what we try to do is to understand urban labs and to help urban labs by developing tools to support them. And that will also be the two parts of my talk. The first part will be on understanding urban labs, and the second on tools for urban labs. So for understanding urban labs, we try to find answers to, well, the three basic questions that apply to any human undertaking and also humans itself, in fact. What are urban labs? Where do they come from? And where are they going? So first of all, about what are urban labs? Urban labs has become a very popular term. It's being used widely, all kinds of variations, also different, slightly different labels are being used since about, well, 2000, 2005. That's about the time it all started to emerge. And around 2010, there's been a big boom of these urban labs. Broadly, you could distinguish between urban living labs and city labs. Urban living labs are focusing on urban sustainability challenges. Well, what you do in a lab is to experiment with new things. So in urban living labs, they're mostly experimenting with new ways to address urban sustainability challenges. Yeah, climate change has been a big driver in this, particularly the move from cities and mayors around the world to say, okay, if our national governments are not taking action, we will start taking action. But of course, the question is then, what kind of action, what to do, how to do it. So that's been a big boost for urban living labs, addressing climate issues, addressing issues of energy transition, but also urban labs addressing issues about food, local food systems, urban farming, very popular topic, and also urban mobility and air quality, or trying to make urban mobility more sustainable, and in that way making the city more healthy by reducing air pollution. Well, that's a big cluster of urban labs that you can find if you look around. Another big cluster is, particularly also in the Netherlands, quite popular, is what we've labeled as city labs. Those are not so much focusing on sort of technical, socio-technical solutions to sustainability challenges, but are looking for new ways to approach urban development in a much more bottom-up way. And that can concern spatial urban development. It can be about social development, of social cohesion, social interaction, etc. And economic development issues, like, for example, entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. So these are more process focused and also often more in connection with local governments that are asking themselves, well, at this time, how should we approach things in different ways? An example of an urban living lab that we've worked with a lot and are still working with is the Stadslab 2050 in Antwerp, so City Lab 2050, which has as a slogan, wij experimenteren een toekomst, or we experiment ourselves a future. And this has been established to find innovative ways to address the many sustainability issues that Antwerp faces, with the aim to, well, sort of achieve a sustainable city by 2050. That's why the 2050 is in the title of the Urban Lab. And as you, well, if you would have a look at their website, then you see they have a lot of what they call trajectories going on, themes that are active. They do experiments on circularity, energy, mobility, air quality, climate adaptation, etc. So they're quite active, and together with a lot of different actors in the city, they are thinking about new ways to address these issues, and they're testing these new ways. An example of a city lab is Maastricht Lab, so City Lab of Maastricht, 20 kilometers away here from Heerlen, the capital of our province of Limburg. Also with Maastricht Lab, I have a long history of working and researching with them together. Maastricht Lab is focusing on new ways to approach spatial development of the city. As well, as you can see, if you could read Dutch, they call themselves a co-creative development platform, and they've always tried to well, sort of address an open invitation to all actors in the city to team up with the municipality and develop new ways and new ideas for spatial development of the city. If you would have a look at their website, you can see this overview of ongoing projects and finished projects, and it's about vacant property, vacant spaces in the city, currently not utilized buildings, etc., where they're looking for new purposes, new ways of making them useful and adding to quality of life in the city. If I look at the projects that you come from, SuNSE project and Empower project, then I think the connection is most strongly to this second type of urban labs, the city labs, where they are focusing on innovation for local development. For example, the Empower project, which I picked up from the information I got, is that it's testing and experimenting with new ways to reintegrate excluded neighborhoods. And the SuNSE project is developing new ways and approaches to support social entrepreneurs. So these are new challenges or new ways to old challenges that local governments are struggling with and are trying to find out, well, what works and what doesn't work. And you can do that in a temporary project like the SuNSE project, like the Empower project. But you can also establish an urban lab as a city and use that urban lab as a place to experiment with these new approaches. So if we ask ourselves, well, what are urban labs? You could see it as spaces in a city where a city can experiment with and learn about new innovative practices. Within an established bureaucracy, as local governments are, this is difficult to do. It's difficult to take a very experimental approach when everything has to be according to established rules and guidelines. and everyone has to be informed and agree, etc., then of course you don't have much space for experimentation, nor space for failure and learning. So that's a sort of raison d'etre, a reason of existence for urban labs. If we look at urban labs and sort of try to find a common denominator, what kind of features do they share, then you see, well, a couple of things that turn up in most of these urban labs. First of all, they're very problem-oriented, so they're really trying to find innovative solutions, new ways to address local challenges. It's really solution-oriented, and it's never the local government alone that is a partner. That's the partner involved that's doing this. It's typically a place where different actors come together and also together try to find these solutions. And so the third feature is the co-creative feature. So it's these different actors that together try to develop new ideas for new practices, for new ways to deal with these challenges. And it's not only co-creation in the sense of new ideas or involving citizens in new ideas, but it's also together testing it in real life. That's where the lab connotation comes from, the living lab idea. It's not just brainstorming, etc., but also implementing it and testing it. And by testing it, learning from what works and what doesn't work. So from the successes and the failures. So a problem orientation, a participatory approach, co-creation of solutions, testing them in real life and learning from this. Those are the common features. So the next question is, where do they all come from? Because suddenly when I started getting involved with urban labs in 2014, there were a few, but they were rapidly multiplying. And within a few years, there were many more, and suddenly they were all over the place. So for me as a scientist, that it was an intriguing question, where do they all come from? And when I had a closer look at what are these urban labs, what people are involved in it, what do they want, etc., I discovered they sort of, came out of a merging of trends in government, society, and economy. And most of them emerged around 2007, 2008, 2009, and then many more came. And well, that was the time of the economic crisis. And not only an economic crisis, but also these were already long-standing trends in our society. A retreating government, so a government that wanted more and more not to do things alone anymore, but to involve other actors and sometimes even to hand over part of their task to other actors in the city. And at the same time, society in terms of citizens has become much more vocal, also usually much higher educated, much more willing to be involved in the development of the place where they were living and working. And so the number of citizen initiatives was also rising already for many years. And because of the economic recession, a sort of gap came in urban development, in which was sort of filled by these urban labs. Okay, so then the third question about urban labs is, where are they going? And this is still very much an open question to me. It's most of the urban labs are still in a sort of, initial phase. Sometimes this initial phase is prolonged, that they have received subsidy, for example, or support for 3 to 5 years, and then, well, they did a good job, but still wasn't clear, well, what the final shape would be. So they got an extension. So it's still rather open what will happen to all these urban labs. It may be that they will be a temporary structure, so that after a couple of years that many of them will be gone. For example, because the new practices that were developed in this urban lab have been incorporated into the existing structures. For example, in the Gebroker Bos project in Heerlen, which you may have heard about, where they were experimenting with a new way of development, of spatial development, and dealing with citizens that had initiatives in spatial development. This project has been formally ended recently, and the new way of working that's been developed has been sort of transferred to other organizations, existing structures that were there already and are now adopting these new approaches. And so in that way, you can sort of close down your urban lab. It's served its purpose, and there's no need to continue with it. It can also be that, for example, the local governance structures adopt an experimental approach. So this is what has been tried in Maastricht. The Maastricht lab tested, said, well, we focus now on more the spatial development. But in fact, what we try to develop is a very experimental way of working for civil servants in the municipality. And our sort of dream is that each and every civil servant in Maastricht has different modes of working and can shift depending on the issue from one mode to another. And one of these modes of working would be the experimental mode of working, which has been developed in Maastricht Lab. So they set up a training program for civil servants within the municipality. But yeah, they started very enthusiastically, but then several key persons left, and as far as I'm aware of it, it's sort of in a sleeping mode now. So that's not so easy. But that was sort of the initial idea about Maastricht Lab. It would be there temporary, and then the new way of working would be transferred throughout the municipality. It could also be that urban labs in several cases become a permanent structure. And we see that at several places. For example, what could happen is that the lab becomes the institutionalized form of the new practice. And this is something that might happen to Stadslab Heerlen. Stadslab Heerlen is now focusing on supporting social and cultural entrepreneurs, supporting talent development, and in that way stimulating also the local economy and young entrepreneurs. It could be that Heerlen, Stadslab Heerlen develops in, let's call it the Heerlen hub for social entrepreneurship. So that the municipality says, well, okay, you did a good job, and actually we need a permanent structure to support social entrepreneurship in the city. So yeah, this is what you will do in the future, and you will be supported for that. It could also be that the lab becomes the institutionalized space for experimentation, so that the municipality, for example, concludes, well, we need a permanent place where we can do experiments to find new challenges, new solutions to new challenges, because new challenges will occur, will keep on occurring, popping up. So it would be very good if we have a space where these issues could be addressed in an experimental way. This was the idea behind Stadslab Antwerpen, and that was definitely the ambition. So this is what they're still trying to do, so that they have a lot of interaction with different departments of the local government, asking them, okay, what are challenges you're addressing with, that you have difficulty with, and where we can look for innovative ways to solve them in an experimental way in our Stadslab, in our urban lab. However, what you see in reality is that it's very difficult for civil servants to think in this sort of experimental way, and also to allot budget on a permanent in a permanent way for this. So what you now see happening in Antwerpen is that the lab is sort of becoming a non-experimental, more implementation unit for specific tasks. They say, well, you're good at this and you are good at that, and well, we have this project and please run this project for us. But of course not in an experimental way, because there's a project plan and you sort of simply have to implement the project plan. So it's still very much open how it will develop in Heerlen, in Antwerpen, in Maastricht, and in all these places, whether we will see still urban labs after 10 years, or whether most of them turned out to be temporary structures. And if they were temporary structures, whether the new practices that were developed have found a permanent place. All right, so far for understanding urban labs, I'd like to switch to the second part, which is much shorter, tools for urban labs. So when working with all these urban labs for these years, we looked at things, well, what sort of difficulties are urban labs facing? Things that they need support for. And well, three major issues were identified. And the first was about how to build your lab, how to organize it, how to establish it, who should be involved, how to organize your processes, how to shape the interaction between the different actors, etc. So more the governance and process aspects of an urban lab. The second major issue that we find out urban labs have quite difficulty to deal with is experimentation and learning. And that's actually quite a surprise for us, because we thought, well, the core idea of a lab is that you experiment and you learn from these experiments. But well, the interesting thing is that in reality, it's not so easy. In the day-to-day running of a lab, it often somehow sort of, disappears, runs out of sight. You had a very open experimentation approach, and suddenly you find yourself, trying to achieve preset targets all the time. You really wanted to learn from it, but there's no space for failure, so you cannot learn from mistakes. And in the end, well, you have to write a report and there's no time for reflection and to draw lessons. And then the third issue is about the scaling up. It's about the spreading of the lessons, institutionalization of lessons, incorporating these lessons in existing structures. This is also something that is quite difficult and often fails. So the lab has been a success. They've done very, very nice experiments. A lot was learned, and then that's it. Nothing happens afterwards. So we looked at these issues together with urban labs, and we also looked at ways how can that be improved? How can you be supported in doing this better? So we developed tools for that together with these labs. They also came up with ideas, and we tested these tools together with them, and we then also improved the tools from these tests in reality. The first tool is the lab kit. So I'm not going to explain in detail what it is, but it's it's a support tool for building a lab. The slogan on the box says an urban lab in a day. So if you use the kit, you can sort of, well, develop the whole design for your lab together with all the partners that are interested in becoming involved in a day. Together with this kit, there's a booklet called Guidelines for Urban Labs, which provides much more detailed information, background information on all these questions, all these issues about how to build an urban lab that are addressed in the kit. As a kind of expansion pack to this lab kit, we recently developed the experimenting and learning kit for urban labs, which has a similar design as the lab kit, but which has a lot of questions that are addressed and also possible answers to it, focusing on the experimentation and learning part. This was developed in the Tech for Labs project, which was a national project together with labs from the Dutch network of urban labs, city labs. Then the third tool was developed in a European project, the Smarter Labs project, where we focused on issues of scaling up and social inclusion in urban labs. So as an outcome of this project, we had a set of guidelines on how to anticipate constraints on upscaling inclusive living lab experiments. And the set of guidelines are also shaped in the form of a fan with, well, where the question is posed and also possible ways to address this in your urban lab. All kinds of possible constraints that could occur after you've developed innovative solutions, and how to already anticipate these constraints in developing the solution, so that you come up with a solution that is well scalable and that can be easily incorporated in existing structures. Okay, if you want to know more about these tools, I've added some hyperlinks in this slide where you can learn more about the tool, and also if you're interested in obtaining it, you find information on how to get it. We have them readily available already for the lab kit and the Smarter Labs toolkit, and very soon we'll also have it for the experimentation and learning extension pack for the lab kits. Okay, that was it, what I had to present. So now, well, 15 minutes at least left for questions if you have any. So I will now close down the sharing of the screen and hopefully become visible to you again. Let's see how we can do this. Hi, okay.
Just
stop sharing, it says. Yeah. Okay. Are we back? Yeah.
Yes. Everybody's coming back.
All back, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so feel free, any questions for clarification or for discussion or on how does this connect to our situation, whatever.
Thank you. Yeah, can I just come in with a quick question? I think
Sure.
I'm getting feedback in
There's
my
an
ear. I
echo.
think somebody's maybe needing to mute if there's speakers on. That's better. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just, that was a really good presentation, so thank you very much for that. I think it was really helpful to explain a bit about the context between Urban Lab and City Lab. It helped me understand a bit more about City Lab, actually understanding what you do. What can you tell me a little bit more about the relationship between the two organizations and how, you know, do you refer, do you share information? Is there any kind of structural relationship? Could you maybe explain a little bit more?
Yeah, I think this is misunderstood. Probably I've not been clear enough about it. So I think what you're referring to is Stadslab Heerlen. So let's say City Lab Heerlen. So the sort of organization in Heerlen that is implementing the SuNSE project. So where Linda is involved in, Monique is involved in, I'm also involved in the core team. And this is an example of an urban lab. So urban lab is what I talked about, is a broader notion of this phenomenon of, like the City Lab in Heerlen, but also the lab in Maastricht, in Antwerp, Malmö, Brussels, etc. So there's only one in Heerlen. To be specific, there's only one organization. That's Stadslab Heerlen.
Okay, thank you.
Frederic has raised his hand. There you are.
Hi.
I think you're muted, Frederic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It clarified also. It was very useful for that. It's yeah, a bit of Asian concept. I think like it anyway. Just a quick question also on the sociology of these labs. I have the idea that they are more elitist or more for highly educated people. Are there counter arguments for that, or have you observed other, labs where there is a real sociological mixity, or is it for business school people to spend their time there, or there is really a kind of real sociological mixture, you know?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think I share your criticism. I think also the way they emerged. Actually, so they did not emerge from local governments. They emerged from society. But if you look at which people, which citizens were taking these initiatives, then these were typically the highly educated citizens. So that these were designers, architects, etc. So people that were saying, okay, we're not happy with the way that our local government is dealing with issues in our city. We have better ideas, and well, we organize ourselves and come up with sort of alternative approaches. And of course, they were good-willing people, so they say, yeah, we have to do this together with the neighborhood and involve everyone. And so I think there was a lot of sincere will to make this broad and to incorporate all kinds of citizens. But I think in practice, it was still sort of party of the privileged very often. So that's why we have emphasized always it's important that the local government also becomes an important partner in these urban labs. And well, as a public organization, also takes care of, well, the openness of the urban lab and sort of, yeah, taking an active approach to incorporate all groups in society in these urban labs. And so if I look at urban labs, I think many of them are still quite elitist, and I think also the benefits that are generated often sort of end up with the more privileged groups in society. So that's definitely a criticism I share with you. On the other hand, what we also see if, for example, local governments, particularly in the Netherlands, are really actively becoming involved. And I think the Gebroken Bos project, which you may have heard about, is a good example of that, where there's really a focus on empowerment of well, the non-elite groups in a neighborhood or society. And I think that's a very important part of making an urban lab more socially inclusive, that you include a real empowerment component in it, so that you enable also other citizens to participate in it. Another example where they had a very different approach was in Brussels, where they said, well, actually, we don't trust our local government that much in reaching out to these groups. And so they involved a local environmental NGO, and they took a much more activist approach. So they really started organizing bottom-up activities in, well, let's say less privileged neighborhoods, mobilizing the people, and in that way, yeah, making it, well, definitely much less elitist than it would have been when it would have come from that local government. So it really depends also on the local context, also on the political context, which approach you could take to make an urban lab much more socially inclusive. Yes, Linda, I see you.
I would like to react on that, because in, what I see in the City Lab of Heerlen, we focus on the younger people. And I think that one of the skills of Joop or broker, they all know Joop and Jos already, Joop.
Okay.
One of the skills of Joop is to involve the not usual suspects. So I think here in our City Lab there is really a broad range of people who are thinking and acting and doing things within the City Lab.
Sorry, Bernard has raised his hand.
Yes, we are speaking quite a lot of time about the big city, and I would like to know if you identified a size for a city to start a city lab, an urban lab. I mean, here in Luxembourg, we have the biggest city is Luxembourg City with 100,000 people, and we here in the south of Luxembourg, we are city more about 12,000 people around this. And do you think you need a minimal of population or like this to set up an urban lab in some place? Is about minimal of population or condition of life, unemployment? Do you have any items about this?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Well, in our projects, we had partners ranging from Vienna and Brussels on the one hand, as being the largest cities, but also very small cities like Leoben in Austria, which is, I think, less than 50,000. So the size doesn't really matter that much. But of course, what does matter is that, yeah, there's money to invest, because in the end, there are people that are not doing regular, let's say, bureaucratic tasks that have to be done. But yeah, they're doing new things. So yeah, you have to create new positions actually. So it does require definitely some funding to keep it going, to get it started. And in that way, you could say it's a bit easier for a larger city with large budgets than for a small place with really limited resources. So I think that's, yeah, in that way there may be a correlation. On the other hand, in practice, we find it has much more to do with let's say the orientation of the local government, whether they have a very traditional approach, very conservative approach, or whether they see the need for change, for developing new ways of working. And that may be also the case in very small localities.
I don't see any raised hands anymore. I don't see anything in the chat. Oh, there's something. Ah, Bernard has a question.
No, just one question small, because you make a difference between living lab and urban lab. Do you know in your experience if you identified these two approaches working together? Because now you are speaking quite a lot in France about tiers-lieu, is a place where you find a part of living lab and urban lab. And do you meet this also in your approach?
Yes, thank you. Yes, you're quite right. So this is typically what scientists do. Right? They try to make categories and classify, etc. But the reality, of course, is always a mix of things. So some of these urban labs are more like an urban living lab. Some are more like a city lab. Some at one time are more like a city lab, and then the next time more like a living lab. Sometimes they're really combined. So it's you're quite right. So it's more as a support in trying to understand urban labs and the different functions they have, rather than saying, okay, this is really an urban living lab and this is very different, it's a city lab, etc. Yeah, so you're quite right, it can go together, it can go hand in hand.
Okay, thanks. And in French, we said you have a typical name now for this. We said tiers-lieu.
Tiers-lieu, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Because so far we didn't have a French partner. We had a French professor as a sort of advisor to one of our projects, but not a French living lab partner or urban lab partner. So it's good to know. Tiers-lieu, okay.
Yeah, okay. If you have any questions, ask us. We could help you in this approach.
Okay, thank you. Good to know. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Now he's replacing his screen again.
I have a question for the group. Our city lab and this kind of hub, as we call it, is in our group also a hub like this? Do we have a living lab or an urban lab in our SuNSE project or NPower?
No,
No, I don't believe so.
no, I don't think so.
Okay, that's good to know, because when I have to write a recruitment plan, it's just a different organization. So for me, it's quite difficult to write a plan for you guys. So I need your input on that, but that we had discussed earlier in our PhD meeting.
Yeah, well, it's always good to have a real look at what an organization is doing, because the urban lab as a label has become very popular. So I would say there are quite a few of initiatives that call themselves an urban lab, but if I look at them, then I think, well, you're not an urban lab. On the other hand, there are quite a number of organizations that never heard of the word urban lab, but when I look at the way they are working, I think, well, that's typically an urban lab. So don't look at the label, but look at the inside of the box. What is happening there? How are you working, etc. So
maybe
yeah.
that was my question. Does somebody in the group recognize itself now as an urban lab or living lab? Okay, are there more questions? Or are we ready for lunch? I think so.
Just 1 minute
too.
over.
Me
1
too.
minute.
Yeah.
Well,
What
Joop,
timing.
thank you very much. I think this helped to get a bigger idea of the context of our lab. And when we have questions, we know where to find you.
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the
Okay, really good.
presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you at
Thank you.
Bistro.
See you this
Okay.
afternoon, folks. Okay.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye.